We're talking today with James Stone, the author of 5 Easy Theses, Commonsense Solutions to America's Greatest Economic Challenges. Welcome to Redera.
Well, thank you. Good to be with you.
Thank you. What are the greatest economic challenges faced by America today?
Well, let me say that I selected 5. Somebody might say that there are foreign policy issues that are more important than these. Perhaps there are environmental issues, but I picked some strictly economic problems. And the 5 are the fiscal balance, which includes the national deficit and Social Security, the concentration of wealth in this country, education, healthcare, and excesses on Wall Street. Those are the 5 that I felt needed to be dealt with and that have economic solutions that are within our reach if we can summon the political will.
You did an excellent job in explaining the different problems, and some of them, even you have gone into the origin of the problems. Maybe we can take one at a time and kind of delve into that, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
First, with fiscal imbalance. How did we get there, and what can we do? Are we making any progress, or are we getting deeper?
Well, everybody knows that we have a big national debt. Now, great nations do have some degree of debt, but I think we waste a lot of what goes into our annual deficits. And we don't need to do that. All the attention is given these days to appropriations, to spending. But the bigger waste, in my opinion, lies in the tax code. We allow people to deduct in a way that we shouldn't. It's quite wasteful. The most glaring deduction that I think shouldn't exist is for interest. That's both a personal deduction for home mortgage interest and the corporate interest deduction. Both of those should be gotten rid of. They're both popular, but they're both mistakes.
And they sort of significantly contribute to the growing deficits. And as you explained very well, that there's spending and there's wasteful spending. Is there political will to bring around, or what we need to educate people so that they understand that how difficult, how grave the situation is?
Well, I think people realize that the deficits are enormous and a threat in some sense to the country, that to the extent that people overseas own this debt, we're going to be paying out some of our future to people overseas for something that we get or think we get today. But let me see if I can convince you that we're not really getting anything. The home mortgage deduction is very popular. People think that's a wonderful thing for the government to do. But if you think about it carefully, the bottom third of the population, the people who need the help most, get nothing from it because they're renters. The next third of the population get nothing from it because they don't itemize their deductions. And only if you itemize deductions can you gain. And so even within the top third, where this mortgage interest deduction applies, you're subsidizing the larger houses at the expense of the smaller ones, so you're subsidizing those who need it least. It's not good public policy, and it costs something like $80 billion a year. And the corporate interest deduction is worse. It finances a preference for debt over equity, which makes the economy less stable, and it finances takeovers, which increase concentration. So these are just, and that's much more expensive. So these are mistakes. They would erase the whole deficit if we got rid of these mistakes.
And then, we also have Social Security issue as well. Do you want to touch upon it? What are the views on Social Security? Are there any possibilities we can do something?
Sure. Social Security is more of a long-range problem. The deficit is something we have every year. But Social Security is one where the solution is just right in front of us. It's just that nobody really wants to face it. And I don't blame them, except that it's necessary. At the time the eligibility age for Social Security was set, people lived into their 60s or just about 60. Now people live to be just about 80. If we can make progress on cancer, which I think we will, people will live to be 90. And we have to change the eligibility age. We have to raise it to correspond to the reality, or we'll be supporting people for 25 and 30 years at the expense of people who are still working, and we can't really do that. So we have to face it, and the sooner we face it, the easier it is to do it gradually and painlessly, rather than all of a sudden in a crisis when it'll be very painful.
Very well said. It's all about preparing, advanced planning, and then making it visible and having everybody participate in it so that we have a smooth transition.
Exactly. And we can do that if we do it now rather than wait until we run out of money in Social Security.
We talked about fiscal imbalance, and the second thing that you mentioned about, which was the second issue. If you want to move on to the second issue, we can talk that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, is inequality in the United States. There's a lot of angry voters this season, and people talk about that a lot. And I think it's easy to understand. Even if people don't know this statistic, they can feel it. The median income in the United States has not changed at all since 1974. And there's been a huge amount of wealth created, but it's all gone to the top. And so people are feeling that all the money didn't go to them, it went to somebody else, and that's true. And if we don't change it, what we end up with is a society in which all the money is what I call sequestered at the top. It can be spent on luxury goods or saved, but it's not in the economy and it's not benefiting people. And as I say, it doesn't help the median income at all. And then if we don't have estate taxes, it passes to the next generation of wealthy kids who become wealthy adults. And then we have something even worse, exactly what the founding fathers of this country were trying to get away from, which is a hereditary aristocracy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We do have wealth creation. That's not a problem. It's really more of a question of wealth distribution.
Oh, I'm in favor of wealth creation and rewards for that. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur myself, and I think that it's a wonderful thing in our country that you can get to be wealthy and have some privilege if you create a lot of economic value. That's a great thing. That's a wonderful thing. But at some point, society has to provide that the average person can gain from growth in the whole economy and not just the wealthy. And that's what's happened in the last 40 years.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do we have that perceived mobility, social mobility that we once had? Do we still have it, or Europe is now doing better than us?
Well, I think that we used to have more social mobility than we have now. Unfortunately, our economic classes have become somewhat more rigid, and as we allow hereditary wealth to be passed down, they will be more rigid still. That's what we shouldn't want. We want to have a maximum of mobility, and we want to have some fair distribution between those who are earning the most and the average person in the population. These are matters of degree, but we've passed the right degree point. We've passed now the point we reached in the Gilded Age, before the Great Depression. And if we keep going, we're going to be the kind of country, as I said, that our founding fathers didn't want us to be.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Obviously, wealth concentration can eventually lead to some serious social problems. It may even lead to revolution if people get very upset about it.
Well, that's correct. I think that revolution in this country is unlikely, but political alienation becomes very likely. At some point, when people say, I'm not getting any of the benefit of economic growth in this country, they turn to, what are sometimes called men on horseback, to people who promise them things that are going to disrupt society rather than heal it. And so I worry about political alienation. I think that's going to come if we don't share in some way the growth that this country is enjoying.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Very well said. Now, there are three reforms that you talk about that could be very beneficial to the country, and also at the same time there are challenges that the politicians and the nation has to confront together. Do you want to start first with healthcare or education, or with the financial reform?
Let's talk about education a little. Our education system at the graduate school level is wonderful. Probably the best in the world, almost certainly the best in the world. At the college level, it's pretty darn good. But we're not serving people at the K through 12 level who are not going on to college, and that's something like 70% of the population won't ever get a college degree, and we're not serving them very well. We're not giving them the vocational and occupational skills that help the mobility you asked about earlier, and that European countries and Asian countries provide plenty of. We do a one-size-fits-all high school curriculum, and we're just not equipping the people who don't go to college to be ready to work. And those who do go to college, we're beginning to charge them so much that only those who are wealthy to begin with can get out of college without crippling debts. So we need to fix those things. We can. We're a very wealthy country, but we're not on the track to fixing them now. So we need to change that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The vocational institute or having some kind of trades, those who are not prepared to go to the college, that brings some level of sophistication in knowledge and brings some competencies that could create some good living wages for many people, but we are still not supporting that.
Well, that's correct, and we should do it. And if we don't do it in high school, the place to do it, and what I actually favor, is universal national service after high school, in which everybody does something in the social services. There's plenty of social service to be done, or in the military, or in rebuilding our infrastructure, which is pretty pathetic these days. We are not keeping up our infrastructure. So if everybody spent a couple of years doing that, those people who don't go on to college would learn a trade, and those people who do go on to college would earn financial credit to be able to pay for it and afford it. So I think everybody would benefit, and in addition, I think it's patriotic, and it also encourages some social mixing that I think is good for the country. Mm-hmm. So I would like to see a universal service program, but somehow we have to provide this vocational training, and we have to better finance colleges.
So that's the education. What's the next one you want to go for?
Healthcare. In healthcare, people talk about our system as though it's something we really want to preserve, our free healthcare system or, free market healthcare system. But the truth is it's not really a free market healthcare system. It's a system that's sort of half government and half private, and it's not working very well. And the measure of that is that we spend about 18% of GNP on healthcare, and nobody else spends more than about 10%. That difference of 8 points of GNP is about $1 trillion a year, maybe $1.3 trillion a year, that we are wasting because we don't get better life expectancy, we don't get longer healthy lives, we don't get less obesity, we don't get less infant mortality, we don't get less morbidity. We don't win on any of the statistics, but we spend this extra $1.3 trillion a year, and we shouldn't do that anymore. We need to cut back on what healthcare costs, or it's going to squeeze out everything else people want to buy. Mm-hmm. And we can do it. The costs lie really in 4 areas. We have too much diagnostic testing, a lot of it driven by defensive medicine. We have too much marketing and administration cost. In our country, we pay about 20% for marketing and administration, and nobody else spends anything like that. We're the only country in the world that seems to be pushing up pharmaceutical prices instead of down, and we spend too much on end-of-life care. Now, end-of-life care has a lot of philosophical issues connected to it, some of which I don't have good answers to, but I can tell you this much. If we asked people when they were healthy and rational what kind of end-of-life care they wanted and then obeyed them, we would save a tremendous amount of what we spend on end-of-life care. So we can bring healthcare back into a reasonable amount of spending and save over $1 trillion a year, but it takes political will to do that isn't there so far.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And sometimes in the free market system, you want to wait till the system breaks or is close to breaking, and then we end the crisis more, or we can get consensus behind it and fix it before it breaks.
Which is exactly what I would like to do in all of these areas, including the last one we haven't touched on, which is what to do about financial reform, about Wall Street, because we've allowed the banks to get too big. We've allowed much too much leverage, particularly in derivative instruments. And we've allowed hedge funds to develop into a multi-trillion-dollar industry with essentially no disclosure. The lessons from the Great Depression were easy, and they were well learned at the time. A maximum of disclosure, a minimum of leverage. And it worked well for 50 years. We had the best regulated and best functioning financial markets in the world. And then we let go of those two pieces of learning. And now we have too much leverage and not enough disclosure. We can fix those things, but that's a hard one to fix because campaign contributions tend to come from wealthy people. And to the extent that you have all this wealth concentrated in Wall Street, it has undue political influence. So that has to be overcome in order to fix these problems.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Those are 5 very good theses as you outline, and that is about the book. Tell us a little bit more about the author. You have had the opportunity and privilege to work both in the private and public sector.
Yes, I'm in my 3rd career. I was an academic first. I taught economics at Harvard. And then in my 2nd career, for 8 years, I was in government. I was the Insurance Commissioner of Massachusetts. And then I was chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission in Washington. And then for the last 30 years or so, I've run an insurance company that I started from scratch and has now become a fairly large writer of auto and homeowners insurance.
Very well. And that is all in Massachusetts, or it's across the country?
We're not all across the country, but our biggest state is New Jersey, and second would be Massachusetts, then Connecticut, and then New Hampshire.
How did you get involved in economics? Was there an interest right from the beginning, or what brought you there?
Well, I came to college not knowing what I would major in, but I loved my economics courses because they taught a practical way to think about public policy problems. And I liked the practicality that economics provided. So I stayed with it all the way from my interest freshman year all the way through a PhD and faculty.
We have been speaking with James Stone, the author of 5 Easy Theses. We are thankful to you for your time and your comments, and I would encourage people to read the books, and maybe they'll come away with some more thoughtful ways of fixing the country, or where we have some potential ways to fix it before it breaks. Are you looking to write more books or focus on more issues?
Well, I don't know. I don't have a plan to write another book. Let's see how this one sells. I hope people will look it up on iTunes or Amazon or at a bookstore and buy it. But I will stay interested in these issues.
Well, if you do write any book on this topic, please keep us in mind. We would certainly like to hear your views on it.
I will be back to you. I enjoyed this very much.
Thank you very much for your time and your comments.